How's it going, everyone? Mufari here. Welcome to Eliabas Radio. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by Dave Holmes. He's the author of Zen and the Art of Anal Bleaching. It's a number one new release on Buddhism on Amazon. There you go.
There
Love the
you go.
artwork. Love the artwork. So, yeah, Dave is here to share a bit about the book, what inspired him to write it, and a lot of the concepts and principles behind it. For every story, there's a deeper meaning. And I'm sure you guys will find it quite interesting. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Dave. Tell us about yourself. What is it that you love to do?
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for having me on your podcast here. And yeah, I like to do it. I like to write, but that's the first book that I've written. So I can't say that I've been writing for years and years, but I've always been a student of philosophy and psychology and Eastern psychology, and my own personal journey, as well as just enjoy reading about it, and also love reading fiction, right? Yeah, it's neat because for me at least, and you may or may not agree, but it allows you to kind of put yourself in the shoes of of whoever the protagonist happens to be, and experience different types of experiences you may not normally experience, and sometimes you learn something about yourself along the way and how you're reacting to it, and that type of thing. And so I started to realize, a lot of when you're reading a lot of Eastern psychology or religion, I mean, it can be kind of didactic, dry. There's theories, but you've got to then really spend some time trying to think, how does that relate
Hmm.
to our contemporary society, right?
Hmm.
And where we find ourselves in our everyday lives, and all. And sometimes that's a bit of a bridge for people to cross the terminology. Sometimes instead of someone saying, "Hey, yeah, I've been really kind of suffering," he's like, they use dukkha and things like that that make it hard, another barrier to relate. And so I thought, why can't off color and totally inappropriate humor weave together fiction, and philosophy in a laugh out loud type of story that also takes a reader on a journey of self discovery?
Hmm.
And so anyway, so I decided, well, what might as well kind of get to work on some philosophical, humorous philosophical fiction. So
Wow. No, and just to kind of draw it back to the Eastern philosophy. So I guess the three things I was going to ask you, if you don't mind, is actually what drew you to study Eastern philosophy, and what about Eastern philosophy resonates with you? And what are some of the key things that you've learned about yourself through your study of Eastern philosophy?
wow. I'll start with your first question. When did I kind of start studying that, right?
Yeah.
And when I was in college, I was a psych major, right?
Hmm.
And and so you're studying these different Western psychological models, which are kind of fine, and they kind of explain behavior to a certain degree. And my senior year, there was a course in the psych program called Limits of Consciousness, and I thought, well,
Hmm.
that's really interesting. So I signed up for that, and it's taught by one of the professors in the psych department, who also happened to be a Zen priest.
Wow.
And the class was really like all about you, and where what are you attached to, what are your limits, what do you hold on to belief wise, and all, and we'd even go to his Zen center and practice, just kind of sitting staring at the wall. Then we'd talk about stuff, and he'd ask questions and needle people and kind of challenge their beliefs a little bit, or assumptions about kind of who they were, and their mind, how their minds worked and stuff. And things would get heated and animated. And then part of what we then had to do each week was go away and write in our journal about our reactions to what happened in class, how the discussion went. And then you'd turn that in, and then you'd get comments back the following week, like, well, why are you so resistant to this? How come you're so defensive there? Yeah, so it was
Hmm.
really kind of neat, because it really kind of started me thinking a little bit more about Buddhism and all. And I started to realize that in its purest sense, Buddhism was a psychology of how the mind worked, right?
Hmm.
What causes suffering, and we get attached to certain things that we,
Hmm.
or there's things we have that we don't want to lose, and I realized it really wasn't any sort of deity-based type of religion,
Hmm.
and it was, and it seemed in some ways a lot more complete, just to explain to at least me, here's what my mind's doing. Boy, I'm
Mm.
really spending a lot of time trying to fortify this story I've told myself of who I am and who I want to be. And when things challenge that, I react, or I'm trying to add something to who I am, or I'm trying to, attain something to feel better about myself. And oh, now, I might lose that thing, and that's at risk. And so anyway, that kind of started me really kind of looking at some of the Eastern psychological kind of perspectives. And I started that journey. Then I ended up doing some graduate work in Eastern philosophy and religion, and eventually dropped out because it was really more the didactic studying of history of these religions, and it wasn't as much of an experiential kind of journey,
Yeah, yeah, makes sense,
Uh,
makes sense.
yeah.
No, it is difficult to absorb concepts when it's non-engaging and non-practical, unfortunately. And a lot of the religious doctrines that we follow today, a lot of them haven't really evolved to meet the complexity of the society we live in and the problems that it faces. So I think that it creates a strong dissonance between people wanting to cultivate a spiritual process for themselves and just forgetting it altogether because it doesn't make sense, doesn't mean anything, and it's more of a nuisance in the end. So,
Very, very well said. That's very well said and concise, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. Right?
no, I thank you about that. I don't know, maybe I could be wrong. It's just opinion at the end of the day, right? But I just actually wanted to ask, so your book, Sin and the Art of Anal Bleaching, the title caption, very interesting. Maybe you could just touch a bit about that, and also what brought you to write the book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good questions. Yeah. So Zen in the Art of Anal Bleaching, a backdoor journey from darkness to light, right? Is
Yes.
the title. And me and a dear friend of mine years ago were bantering around humorous names for books, right? And you've got Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Zen in the Art of Archery, all these Zen in the Art of books, right? And we like Zen in the Art of Anal Bleaching is so off the wall that it is hysterical, right? And then so he thought that up, and then the backdoor journey to darkness to from darkness to light seemed like even a funnier tagline. And so we thought at some point we got to write a book about that. Well, years passed. Neither one of us had ever written anything, right? I shouldn't say any fiction. My buddy Steve ended up writing. He had a blog, that he had for a while, and he developed a lot of content over time, and decided to weave that into a book, and with some common themes. So he created this book called Spiritual Constipation: How to Get Shift Moving, right? And so he writing that book, and I thought, well, he didn't have any desire to write any fiction, but I thought, I need to write something so we can publish the title, because it's funny, but I really decided I wanted to create a fictitious story that was funny, off the wall, dark humor, but yet at the same time really weaved in some of the essences of the psychology of Buddhism in the character's kind of journey of self-discovery through all these ridiculous instances and people he's meeting, and capers that are happening in the book, in a way that somebody could read the story, laugh, and follow the story, and then if they wanted to really pick up on some of the Eastern kind of the philosophical discussions that this guy ends up having with this homeless guy, that lives outside his place along the way. And it could be your own journey of self-discovery if you wanted to be introspective,
Mm.
or you could just enjoy the story, but yet it wouldn't be cloaked in a bunch of Eastern type of
Mm.
language, that type of thing, and an easy fun read with a lot of dialogue and all, right? So I decided, okay, well, I don't have a lot of experience writing, so it probably doesn't make sense to create some whole fictitious fantasy world or whatever. What do I know, right?
Mm.
Well, I lived in San Francisco for 20 years. I know San Francisco, and I know some of the neighborhoods where I lived. I worked in high tech for 16 years. I understand kind of that. So why not have the character live in San Francisco and start out as working in up and comer in high tech, and at least I can write about that from an experiential perspective
Mm.
that is I have a lot to pull from, right?
Mm.
Uh, and so that kind of created the setting for the book, and then I started trying to learning more about writing as I went. So it took me longer because you'd get done with a draft, and then you'd take some master class online about the key things that all good stories have, and you realize you've got like two of the 13, and it's like, oh geez, okay, I better redo that. Then it take another class on how to revise your novel, and you realize, okay, all the key things that every scene should have in there somewhere. Yeah, I'm missing half of those. So by the end of it, I got pretty good at it, but it's almost like I had to rewrite it multiple times because I didn't have a lot of experience to draw from when I started out.
Wow. Interesting how the writing process works, and just reminds you just how difficult it actually is, particularly when you want to do it as authentically as possible. And so I was going to ask about the main character, Toby. He goes through a powerful spiritual shift. Is that a similar shift that you perhaps went through at a certain stage in your life as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, it's not autobiographical. However, I have had my own kind of spiritual
Mm,
journey, so to
mm,
speak.
mm,
We all do to different degrees. So there's aspects of that I found with respect to me that definitely were applicable, and so I kind of included in that because I mean he starts out just being your stereotypical young guy. He's kind of got a family. He's an up and comer in the high tech world, trying to get promoted. Very little tolerance for other people, kind of judgmental, can't stand homeless people, everything else, and really kind of a jerk, in a lot of respects. But yet not atypical, very westernized kind of contemporary character that you find all the time,
true.
and then makes some really piss poor decisions, and his life kind of implodes, and his job, he gets fired, right, and his marriage falls apart. And he's like, "Holy crap!" Who am I kind of now? And so he's desperately trying to recreate what he had before because he's got this story of his identity and who he is. And okay, I need to lose some weight and I need to get a job and make money and get a better place. All those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And which I've gone through at different stages in my life and everything else. But then he kind of starts to, well, he meets this homeless guy who's this ex-Vietnam vet named Daddy, who's actually based on a real guy, the homeless guy that I knew and used to stop and
Wow.
get a beer with and sit down on the curb and talk about life with, when I lived in the inner Richmond in San Francisco, right? And he meets this guy, and the guy will kind of say stuff here and there, like, "How's it going?" Okay, well, it sounds like you're making quite a comeback. You're the hero in the story. And then what do you mean, like the hero in the story? Like, well, our lives are just fictitious stories we write, these narratives about what's happening to us that makes it. And so then he starts kind of thinking about these things, and along the way, and then starts to kind of realize, well, shoot, well, if I'm not just, if I'm something other, these stories are kind of fictitious thought-based constructs, and as is the
Mm,
past and as is the future. And if I'm not buying into those as much as, because now I'm kind of seeing it for what it is, well, what's really going on here kind of thing, uh,
yeah.
yeah. So then, he has other challenges and crises and things like that cause him to realize he can't kind of go back to how he thought about things before, but he's still kind of wildly lost, and eventually kind of has to surrender a little bit to just kind of trust
Mm.
it. Some of what this homeless guy is saying, and here's kind of how you get. Here's where you go next, man, and here's what you got to let go of, and stop trying to justify yourself to yourself, right? I mean, uh, so anyhow.
No, and it's incredible. I'm a huge. I also really looked deeply into Eastern philosophy at quite an early stage, and I found a lot of the concepts interesting, particularly Buddhism, and how some of the Buddhist monks live, and some of the people who have transitioned from our modern world into monkhood, and some of the things that they've had to deal with within themselves. So when I was reading the premise of this book, a lot of those concepts are very, very evident in the character structure and the story. And so I was going to mention or ask, humility seems to be the core message of the story. And I just made to ask maybe why. Because it seems in a lot of these instances, particularly in how the character loses what he thought he was working towards, and he loses in a way that is quite humbling.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, is there a reason for this core element of humility?
Well, the humility is a great word because ultimately there is, to some degree, a kind of letting go of maybe what you always thought was right or true, or at least examining that, right? And that can, and that in and of that, you're kind of we're letting go of a little bit of who we are in that process. I mean, and realizing that, okay, wow, maybe. maybe that's not necessarily reality. It's more of a construct, and it's interesting because a lot of people, when they decide to start, meditating or going to yoga or doing whatever, it comes from a point of trying to add something to who I am. Right. It's like, okay, now, I meditate and isn't that kind of cool and groovy? And, and I'm this spiritual person. I'm reading this stuff. And, I'm going to a retreat. Right. And I'm trying to attain a cool new state of kind of conscious awareness to add to the kick-assness of me. And, but it's another trap kind of too, because now we got our spiritual ego, and now we got to kind of support and try to reinforce that, and it's the same thing, just cloaked a little differently, right? And whereas along that journey, eventually people, everyone kind of gets to the point where they realize they got to start letting go of all those concepts and the ego, and I realize that, or at least breaking their identification with that, and so it becomes a subtractive process. And in that subtractive process, you're letting go of more and more of the character that you have identified and clung to and tried to support your whole life, right?
Mm,
And there is a humility that results from that.
mm.
Because it is humbling and a little embarrassing at times, and you sometimes see suddenly who you kind of believed yourself to be from a different angle that maybe isn't so attractive, or you realize, wow, really, I mean, I got lost down that rabbit hole, for a
Mm.
decade or whatever it happened to be, right? So I think humility is a great word, yeah, and along the way, eventually, the character Toby Tenderhill in the book, very much kind of has to kind of let go and be open to and stop resisting, and in order to find his way.
Wow. No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And it's actually, the people can take a lot from that because we all go through certain points, time does its work with us all in different ways, but we all go through that point, right? And some sooner than others. And so I wanted to ask, you mentioned that the book is meant to help apply Buddhist philosophy into a Western way of life, obviously. So I was going to ask, do you believe that Buddhism is going to be important, particularly in the given situation that is going on in the world? A lot of the things that are happening, political shifts, divides, economic hardships. The list goes on of all sorts of problems that seem to be propping up and much more apparent than ever.
Well, I think that I mean, it can be a helpful tool, right? I mean,
Mm,
yeah, I think that there's a lot more uncertainty now than there has been in recent times. I mean, in history, there's been very uncertain times. That's not unusual or new at all, right? And
mm,
even in other, in parts of the world today, there's tremendous amounts of uncertainty to the point of like, is there going to be a bomb dropped, on
mm.
my house today? Kind of uncertainty,
Yeah,
right? Whereas,
yeah.
but like Europe and the U.S. and there's places where there's not a lot of physical uncertainty, but now there is, there's more potential global conflicts, right? There's
Mm,
very different political environments within countries than there has
mm,
been in the past. And I think with that, uncertainty, there's obviously unpredictability, and we all like a certain amount of predictability because we feel safe. And when that predictability it starts to become less and less predictable, or life does, there's a fear reaction there, right? Something's responding to that because there's a risk to either me physically or me financially,
mm,
or in many different dimensions. And I think that often can kind of bring out the worst in people. But yet, I think if somebody says, "Okay, look, I'm having these reactions. Things are stressing me out. I'm
mm,
feeling anxious. How do I deal with that? Because just feeling super anxious all the time isn't, are you going to just decide to be anxious as hell for the next 10 years? Or how do you want to navigate your life and still be a loving husband or father or
mm,
friend, or, a
mm,
caregiver, or just person in your community? And I think that, Buddhism isn't, anyone can apply those principles, even if they have another faith or another
mm,
deity, right? Just seeing, oh, here's my mind reacting. I'm really attached to things being, stable and predictable. I'm really attached to knowing that my house is never going to be threatened or going to not be able to pay my mortgage. And,
Mm,
and that attachment's causing me a certain amount of suffering because now I'm scared of losing those things, or I'm striving for something that may not be able to be true anymore. I might not
mm,
be able to have this ideal lifestyle in this financial situation, and in seeing the mind reacting to that, it becomes a little less believable because you're seeing that it's a thought constructed related thing that's causing this unhappiness. And Buddhism is one tool that allows people to start to break that identification with that mind, that thinking mind of being the totality of who I am. Because there's something in us that sees the mind doing its thing from time to time. It might be a
mm,
few seconds or something where you're self-aware enough to go, wow, look at me, I'm really getting spun up. Well, something's noticing that, right? And
mm,
can we shift from the mind itself to what's noticing that?
mm,
And and suddenly we're in a little bit of a different conscious place. It's a little bit bigger than that, that contains that mind, but yet that is there, right? And can put us in a place where it's a little bit easier just to kind of accept what is and watch what is, almost like we're watching like a TV film. We're watching this, this drama kind of unfold. We're watching kind of how the mind reacts to it, but it's like a curiosity of a child just kind of trying to figure out the world, and it can be lighthearted, and some people are
mm,
really, really good at just laughing in chaos and the absurdity of it all, right? And I always admire those people. I've got a good friend. His name is John, and I mean, something horrible could be going on in his life, and he'd be just like, "Oh man, this is just not to be believed." But of course, this is what's got served up to me, and he'll laugh kind of about it, and I'm like, what a wonderful place to be, just
mm,
to kind of watch it and watch the absurdity of it, and the horror of it, and yet still be able to kind of enjoy the journey. And there's people like that are kind of just almost hardwired a little bit more that way, maybe. And it's inspiring because there are people that are happy in situations where we would be miserable, right? There's
mm,
people miserable in situations where we would be very content.
mm.
Well, something's going on up here that's causing that difference.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, no, it's a lot to take in, and I definitely recommend those of you that do tune in, give the book a read. Be open, obviously, to the concepts and ideas. Not everything has to be serious. In actual fact, a lot of the gems of wisdom are found in stories of absolute humor, and that's because I think maybe life, in essence, is actually quite more humorous than we think. So I was gonna ask you, Dave, how can people reach out to you and how can they access the book? I'm based in South Africa, so obviously we don't have a Barnes and Noble. We don't have any. I'm not too sure about the outlets that you have that side in the US, but perhaps if there's someone from somewhere else across the world. We just recently got Amazon here in South Africa, fortunately, but in other regions it's still not there. So maybe if there's an ebook version or something of that sort that people can access.
Yeah, right now it's available on Amazon. Amazon's determined though that it's an adult book because of the title, so you have to be in the books section on Amazon to search it up, right?
Yeah.
Or you could go to my website www.oldhairyjesus.com, and then it tells a little bit about the book. There's links to take you to Amazon and all. So Amazon's primarily the way to get it. Now,
Mhm.
if there was somebody that is like, look, I have no access to Amazon, but Dave, could I email you and figure out a way to send you $20? You send me a copy of the book. I'd figure out a way to get it to somebody, right? And my email is oldharryjesus@gmail.com. And so, yes, send me a note and I'll, figure it out. If you don't have access to Amazon, and we'll get you a copy of it.
All right. So I will make sure I put the links in the video and also in the description, obviously, so that people can actually access it much more easily. And I guess the last question I'd have, Dave, so that I don't take too much of your time, is what are your words of wisdom advice for those tuning in today?
I would just say, hey, life can be fun. Yes, yeah, spiritual journey, or even if you don't like the word spiritual, it's a journey of self-discovery, right? It doesn't have to involve, suffering. It doesn't have to involve sacrifice. If it does, those can be fun too, and just be curious, right? Enjoy the process, laugh at yourself, laugh at the world, find a way to make it light. Everyone's going through, the same things. We all have our fears. We all have, uncertainty. We all have doubt and self-doubt and all that. And we mostly keep it inside and present these personas like everything's fine. But we're all a part of this cosmic play, for better or for worse. But we only get a very tiny amount of time to have this human experience, right? And it's a miracle that we're able to have any sort of human experience at all, that anything exists, right? That, let alone us be just a part of it for even a small fraction of eternity. And so enjoy the gift, right? Laugh and appreciate the people that are on your journey with you.
Powerful words, Dave. Really well spoken as well. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for presenting it in a humorous way as well. I think it's more relevant now to our type of society and our type of mindsets. And so, without we'll let you guys, that's Dave Holmes. And yeah, it may be even good to have you on the podcast at another point in time as well. So, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's been my pleasure, and thank you for being such a gracious host.
Thank you so much, Dave.